In 1905, Peter and Emma Lindstrom moved their family from Iowa to the new province of Saskatchewan. They had heard it was a land of promise, and soon established a farm site near the town of Perry, about 40 miles south of Regina. Peter's son Verney eventually took over the farm, and in 1925 built an Aladdin home on the property. His sons relate their memories of the farm and the new home.
You couldn't get, in the heavy dirt, you couldn't get, it was hard to get water for your cattle and stock, you know. And they had this, most of the land was taken up when he come. That was in 1905. And so they had some land out at Perry they were selling. And this quarter is right in along the creek, you know. I guess it looked pretty good to him to see this water running in the creek. And that's why he took up that quarter, I guess.
The reason he took that was because he had water with the creek running through. For sure there'd be water. And he said that the grass grew high, and so you'd have lots of feed for the hay, and he said that if they ever needed some wood in the winter time, they could go to the hills and chop some wood and look for firewood. And so he just figured it was a survival thing there too, you know.
Yeah, I remember, the thing I remember is, well, one thing, I have lots of fond memories, but sleeping upstairs when it's raining and lightning and thundering, that was really nice. I really liked that anyway.
Yeah.
Well, in the case of Eatons, they advertised broadly that these houses were solid Douglas fir without a knot. The lumber is taken from trees that are 200 feet to the first knot, to the first limb, that's where the knots came from, and 7 feet in diameter, and they show pictures to prove that of these being cut down. So they would have 20-foot 2x4s, and I've seen some of these houses being torn down in later years. 20-foot 2x4s, because they were balloon construction, so the 2x4s went right up to 2 stories. Balloon construction, and 20-foot 2x4s, and you could look up and they were solid yellow Douglas fir it was, and they were a very yellow, it wasn't red, it was a very decidedly yellow color, and here's this yellow Douglas fir without knot of any kind. In fact, so they were, I always say, they were built out of lumber that you can't buy today because they don't cut trees like that down anymore, so you can't buy lumber like that. And Aladdin, who was a major company, bigger than Eatons actually, not as well known in later years, but bigger, they had in their plan books $1 a knot guarantee. So they'd send you a carload of lumber from BC and pay you $1 for every knot you could find. Now if we did that today, you could take a pickup load of lumber home from the lumberyard and they'd owe you money, a lot. $1 a knot guarantee, a carload of lumber and not a knot in it. So it was a special quality of lumber. So there is a market and people that you know, find these houses and take them piece by piece and use the lumber and put them back together again, because you literally can't buy lumber like that today. Well, the lumber business was a big booming business, you know. A number of towns had 3-4 lumber yards, and so there was the retail lumber business, and then along comes Timothy and is going to ship it by rail to Milden or Etonia or wherever, and this was a threat to the local business. So the Western Retail Lumbermen's Association took issue with this, and the farm groups of the day, the Grain Growers Association, took issue with the Lumber Association. So in the farm press of the day and in the lumber press of the day, there was very interesting articles where the lumber people were taking a slice off the farmers, for example, saying that a 2x4 wasn't a 2x4, you know. Well, that was the difference between green and plain lumber, and farmers were taking a slice off the line lumber companies, because I think it was related, the word line probably had something to do with it, because line elevator companies, people were at war, farmers were at war with line elevator companies at those days, and these line lumber companies kind of got sucked up in the act, I think. So there were some pretty sharp exchanges between the farm groups of the day and the retail lumber ones of the day. Now what happened was, the Western Retail Lumbermen's Association, which still exists, they have their meeting here in Saskatoon every once in a while. I've never dealt with any of the modern versions of it, but the Western Retail Lumbermen's Association finally decided if you can't beat them, join them, so they came out with their own plan books. And they had, in 1919 and 1920, they had very extensive plan books with houses named after, some of them, the houses were named after towns, like there's a Moose Jaw and an Eatonia and Rivers, Manitoba, all the different towns across the prairie provinces were given, their houses were given those names, and this was the Western Retail Lumbermen's Association. In this catalog they had, you know, Beaver Lumber or whatever company, North American Lumber, could stamp their stamp on the front of it and then sell it locally. So they joined the fray of the catalog house business, or plan book business at least, eventually. But there were some interesting exchanges, and that's why I called it the Lumber Wars. The other thing to look for, if you're ever up there, I've never seen it, is if you see numbers stamped on it, then that's probably an Aladdin. Now Eatons, I have heard stories about lumber stamped with the diamond E, you know, that diamond with an E in the middle was a trademark of Eatons, but I've yet to see it. And the one I had was the Blythe house. He said there was some extra lumber left over and it was in the attic and it was stamped with the diamond E. That house has since been bought by Grant Jones and moved to Watrous, and I have here with me some of the stamped lumber, but it's not stamped with Timothy Eaton, it's stamped with some other lumber company. Because you see, I don't think Eaton's had any lumber mills themselves. They would buy in bulk from lumber mills that existed. So people talk about the diamond E stamped on lumber, but I have yet to see it.
In 1909, James and Susan Boomer, formerly from Ontario, began homesteading in Saskatchewan, 5 miles north of the present-day town of Eatonia. Eventually, their hard work was rewarded with bumper crops and high grain prices, and as a result, they built a new Eaton's home in 1917. The farm stayed in the family over the years, with grandson Gene King taking it over in the 1960s. Frances Gittinger, daughter of James and Susan Boomer, has many fond memories of growing up in the new home.
My dad came to Coppell first. That's where the Easterners came often to Coppell, and then branched out from there. And they came to Coupar, and then they decided that they'd look for some land, and that's what they picked. They came in as homesteaders, and they had bumper crops in 15 with that new soil, and they decided they needed a bigger house, and so that's the one they picked. Well, I remember every room, all the upstairs, all the bedrooms had walk-in closets, you know, which was rare. And I remember the entrance to the back, down in the basement. It was a big door and steps down to the basement so that we didn't have to the wood and coal and the vegetables all were taken down the back door. And that was really nice. There was only one bedroom downstairs. So my mother and dad had that, and all the children were upstairs. There were 8 of us. And a pantry, mind you, that was a blessing. We had an entrance for the outdoor clothing, And then we had this pantry off the kitchen, a dining room and a living room, and a den, and another bedroom. Upstairs was one big room was divided into two, like two bedrooms, but it was all in one. And it had a big clothes closet, bigger than the others. And we had a lot of card games, you know, board games, snakes and ladders and those sort of things that we all had. We had a dining room table, a big round one, oval, and our presents were all put at our place where we sat. And of course, you expected a new doll.
The history of the Boomer King home continues to the present day. As part of Saskatchewan's centennial celebrations in 2005, the Eatonia Heritage Committee moved the house from its original location into the town itself. Anne Reinhardt spearheaded the project.
The house was built in 1917. It was brought by rail, the materials were brought by rail to Pinkham, which is about 17 miles north of where it was eventually built. And they brought it down by horse and buggy to the site. It must have been a wonderful place to move into for that family who were moving out of a two-room house into this very magnificent home, which they'd purchased the drawings from Eaton's catalog. The house was situated 5 miles north of town, and we moved it into town last July, 2005. It's a beautiful old house too. Oh. It's a beautiful old house, and it's exciting to see it change. You know, to change from what it was to what it is even today and what it will be. I really did feel that this is a heritage building. It is a heritage building. Also, it's important that Eatonia have an Eaton Catalogue House. The town was named for the Eaton family. And I could see the possibilities in terms of using it as an art gallery, or as, I have a number of thoughts in terms of its use. So I felt it was a worthwhile heritage project, and I contacted them in regard to grants. And so our first grant application was actually to do the cedar shingles on the roof and also to do the chimney. The cedar shingles had to be done immediately because the house was leaking, and so that had to be done, in fact, before I would get any grant. So I want to also thank the Saskatchewan Heritage Foundation, not only for their funding, but for their moral support, which for me has been extremely important. I've been able to turn to them with questions throughout this venture, and it also signifies that this is an important venture. A lot of people came together to make this happen, and we have to thank those people. I think perhaps first and foremost are those former residents who saw the importance of this house, and also who gave me the encouragement to continue. And also there were a number of companies who have helped us, and I think first and foremost amongst those has to be Benjamin Moore Paints and Home FX in Kindersley, who have supplied all the paint for the house. We wouldn't be where we are today without that huge gift.